Can You Be American and a Color Too? This is a continuation of 3 previous works from the author in addressing the connection between our collective mental health and race ideology.
Mr. Middleton, who is also, we should note, an alum of Indiana University, seeks to address the connection between mental health and the social impact of the race construct. He regularly presents workshops to service providers toward the goal of increased culturally relevant services. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. George Middleton to bring it on.
Welcome.
Good evening. Welcome. Thanks for having me.
So George, I had the benefit of watching you in action during a Indianapolis Startup Ladies, which is a Chamber of Commerce type group, right?
Right.
And I was really impressed, George. First, before we even get into the conversation, I just want to give you kudos that you have a kind of compassion about yourself, George, to allow people to enter into the conversation from where they start, right? You don't have an expectation that they are at the place that you are at or the place that a Charlie Nelms would be at, but you accept them into the conversation starting from the place where they begin. And that is the kind of compassionate, loving exercise that I think is required if we're going to really tackle this conversation around race and deconstructing race. So I just wanted to say that to kind of set the foundation that you are coming at this conversation uniquely and specifically from the perspective of a mental health application. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what your vision is, who is your audience, and what should we be trying to do as a community of humans in this moment right now?
Well, thank you for that assessment of the experience that I invited you to, and you graciously took me up on, because your contribution to that event was invaluable. Before I get into the questions you're asking me, I just want to caution everyone that you're probably, after the end of this interview, either going to think I'm one of 2 things, a genius or certifiably in need of mental health services. So I just want to put that out there because I'm coming at it from a totally different perspective, built on the work of those that have come before us, right? So, and so in doing that, I just want everybody to understand that what you're going to hear, keep in mind that you're probably, if you identify as a racial color, black or white, that it's going to influence how you're going to hear and interpret the things I'm saying. So with that being said, my vision, to answer your question, is to get the average American to understand the difference between racial identity and cultural identity, to get a collective understanding of terminology when it comes to race, because that is what's the most ineffective aspect to the process of trying to be effective in moving the ball forward, is we are not all speaking the same language. We have different definitions of what a racist is or what racism is. Some of us don't even acknowledge that racism exists. So until we can all get on some level of collectiveness about this concept, and it doesn't mean that we all have to agree about anything. It mostly means that we are agreeing to be collective in our approach so that we can move together as a society in the country.
You know, I was always taught growing up that the 2 things you never spoke about was religion and politics. And I think that we really missed the boat with not adding racial relations in that dialogue. I think it's been swept under the rug for so long that anytime you bring it up, there's always the negative connotation attached to it instead of an educational connotation attached to it. Could you speak on that just a little bit? And also the topic, can you be an American and a color too? That statement intrigues me.
Okay, great. Religion is definitely one of the systems that is usually a default that people will revert to say that is the way to, that's to get out of race-free card. If you pray yourself out of it, if you just love your brother, then racism, for all practical purposes, does not exist. Except the problem with that is that the system of religion has adopted and internalized the race ideology. Prime example is the image of white Jesus. Now, when I bring that up, it's not that it should matter what color Jesus is, but the problem is that we know that the color that they're portraying Jesus to be is not authentically accurate. So right there, you're starting with a spiritual deficit, a spiritual falsity that weakens your ability to be spiritually effective. The labels white Christian and black Christian, for example. What is the difference? What's the necessity for color in Christianity? Is there really a difference between a white Christian and a black Christian? You know, when you think about that, Dr. Nelms asked a great question: what is white? You know, and I would add to that, what is black? And the reality of that is that we're operating inside a false ideology, an ideology that was created in the 1600s by the European for the economic purposes of the transatlantic slave trade. And that system has refined itself. Yes, slavery has been abolished in 1865, but tomato, because we are still today having the same outcomes as we had back in the 1800s. So I'm not necessarily interested in getting caught up in the game of semantics. I'm looking at the fruit that the tree bears. And that's where we get lost, is we focus on the terms. Meanwhile, while we're arguing over the terms, we're missing where the money's going. And so that leads to my title, Can You Be American and a Color Too? I'm approaching all my work from a cognitive behavioral therapeutic orientation. So I like to use Socratic questioning to begin the conversation and to help clients find their own authentic answers. So while I have my own answer to this question, the book, it's a workbook, challenges the reader to determine those answers for him or herself. So American is a label, black is a label, white is a label. And the book asks you to consider, are those three labels in alignment with each other, or are there some conflicts with them? And then there's a set of deconstruction activities in the workbook that is a set of scenarios in all of the systemic quality of life areas where you see disproportionate outcomes: education, finance, housing and loans, law enforcement, judicial, employment. And it's not meant to, the workbook is not meant to sit down and just do it in a reading and read in a sequential manner. It's meant to be used as a resource in addressing race wherever you are in your journey of addressing race. So that's the overall vision, goal, and orientation, the title.
What age group would this book be appropriate for?
Well, I want to work from the top down, because we're systemic issues require systemic solutions. And so it has to be leadership driven. And then where the head goes, like my father used to say, who never graduated high school, but I consider to be the smartest man in the world, wherever the head goes, the body will follow. So from a symbolistic standpoint, in most organizations, the head controls the culture and the outcomes of whatever its mission and service is. And families are a system. And so to begin with the head of those households, for them to analyze their own awareness and understanding of what race is, what culture is, because they're not the same and they serve two different purposes. So my audience is really for systems, for service providers, and for anyone who actually identifies by a skin color.
For our listening audience who are just tuning in, you're hearing right now from George Middleton. George has published a workbook that is part of a 3-part series in addressing the connections between race, ideology, and the collective state of our mental health. So his current working book, that's what I'm calling it, is Can You Be an American and a Color Too? Living Outside of Race, Transitioning from Color to Culture.